www.libertarianparty.ru.
Good evening. This is Stefan Kinselла. I'm speaking from Houston. I'd like to say good evening or good morning to everyone in Moscow at the Adam Smith Forum. But in the modern era, after most of the industrialized world has finally adopted sort of an American-style patent system and copyright system, since the early 1800s, let's say, we can identify four historical phases of movements to abolish patent and copyright. So the first one we can identify is roughly the second half of the 1800s, like 1850 to 1873. Now, it was at that point in time, some countries still had not adopted patent systems like Switzerland, and there was opposition to this by the free market, by the free trade people. People that were in favor of free markets and free trade saw these things as monopolies and they opposed them. But what happened was in 1873 there was a depression caused by the Panic of 1873, a large, I think, global depression. And what this did was it caused an increase in nationalism and a reduced opposition to tariffs and protectionism. That is, free trade became less popular because of the emergency of the Depression. And this made the opposition to patents evaporate because it was part of the free trade movement. So in other words, a government-caused recession caused free trade to go out of favor for a while, which caused opposition to patents to evaporate. So the final nations like Netherlands, which had previously abolished patents because of people seeing what a disaster it was, and caved in, and Switzerland, which never had a patent system, and they went ahead and adopted patent systems, and the whole world joined on the bandwagon. So the first movement was against, but a depression ended it. And then in the late 1800s, after this, there was vigorous debate among the individualist anarchists, like Lysander Spooner and Benjamin Tucker. And Lysander Spooner was in favor of intellectual property, but Benjamin Tucker rejected IP similar to some of the arguments I've given now. He had a very clear-reaching vision on this. But this was a small group of individualist anarchists, so that opposition didn't go very far. In the meantime, during this debate by the free market economists, the defenders of these patent and copyright laws, such as in France in the late 1700s, right before the turn of the century, started using the language of property rights to describe these monopoly privileges because they knew that the concept of monopoly wasn't popular with economists and even with the public. So they started calling them property as basically a propaganda ploy, even though, of course, they're not property. Okay. Anyway, so let's return. The third stage of opposition, we can say roughly from the early 1900s, let's say 1930s, to about 1995, the dawn of the internet, there was an increasing amount of skepticism of IP by libertarians and proto-libertarians and free market economists like Arnold Plant, an economist in 1934, and Fritz Machlup, an Austrian economist in the 1950s, had serious reservations about the empirical claims made for IP, that it stimulates innovation or creativity. So there was a lot of skepticism by them. And then in the latter half of the 20th century, more of the explicitly libertarian thinkers like Hayek in 1948, Murray Rothbard in the 60s, Leonard Read, the founder of the Foundation for Economic Education in the U.S., and others like Wendy McElroy and Sam Konkin in the 80s, and Tom Palmer in the 80s started seriously questioning the compatibility of patent and copyright with libertarian property rights. And they made great arguments, and a lot of their arguments are the type I've repeated today, but they didn't have a certain urgency because this was the pre-internet age. Well, around 1995, when the internet arrived on the scene, a lot of the patent and especially copyright abuses became much more exacerbated and more common. It started getting really out of hand, and everyone's more aware of this now because we could see news stories on the internet on a daily basis almost of one crazy patent or copyright Okay, so I'm getting close to my conclusion. So in getting close to that, let me say that we need to not see the solution to this problem as recognizing the patent system or copyright as broken or in need of reform. Okay, it's not broken. It's not in need of reform. It's in need of abolition. It's not really broken. It's doing exactly what it is designed to do. It's giving competitive advantages to government-favored applicants and holders. Okay, so the problem is not software patents. Okay, getting rid of software patents won't solve the problem. The problem is not big corporations. The problem is not junk patents. The problem is not